Hey gang, Max here. It's been kind of a hot minute since I recorded one of these quick updates, so I thought I'd check in. Lately on the technical side of the game, I've been working on a navigation system. So if you think of like collision as being a bunch of shapes that you place to define the physical structure of the scene, then navigation is a second set of invisible shapes that you place, which kind of give the scene like a mental map. So all these characters can reference that when they're picking positions and directions. So for instance, you can see this crab tank down in the corner here, and he's just sort of wandering around inside this region as opposed to accidentally wandering off the coast into the ocean. It's also used for pathfinding, so you can see I've got these like test shapes here that I can move around, and that they can use the link points in between the nav regions to figure out how to do like turn-by-turn directions along the streets so that enemies can follow you around the city without crashing into buildings. That was pretty easy to do, and I actually set that up originally on our last dev stream, so you can watch me code that live. But I relied on this property that all the regions were convex, which basically meant that like between any of these two green points, you could take a straight line, and that would keep you inside the region, and so that made it like an appropriate path. But I wanted to add these sort of spline-shaped regions as well. And those presented a challenge because it's not convex. If I try to go from this green point to this green point, it's going to like cut across that corner. And so my solution to this, which I think is pretty novel, I haven't seen it elsewhere, is to kind of observe that each of these nav regions defines a kind of local coordinate space. So like relative to the center of each region, I can sort of measure your position along this red axis and along this green axis, and I'll call that like your UV coordinate. And that's pretty simple to do for these like straight axis regions like the box and the cylinder, but there's also a natural way to define it for the spline path, which is that we can define the u-coordinate as just the distance along this red curve to the closest point on the spline. And then we would define green as just your horizontal offset from that closest point. And so if you think about it that way, the like UV local coordinate space for the spline is just a box like these other regions. And so even though it's not convex in world space, it is convex in UV space. And so if I drag the path over to here, you see when it charts a path through the spline region, it's a straight line in the local coordinate space, but projected into world space, it's an arcing path. And so as long as all my enemies just track their like navigation position using UV coordinates and like only project it back into world space to like draw or to move, then they just automatically follow the arcs of these paths.